The courtroom was bustling with activity as the trial proceeded under the watchful eye of Judge Samuel Turner, his gavel striking the wooden desk with authority as lawyers on both sides presented their arguments today. It was a business dispute case that seemed straightforward, but would unravel into something much more complex than anyone expected. At the front of the room stood Maya Grant, a black attorney known for her sharp legal mind and her ability to keep her cool. In even the most tense situations, she was representing a local small business owner who had been wronged by a larger corporation. And Maya knew this case had the potential to change the trajectory of her client's life. She had prepared for weeks every piece of evidence, meticulously examined every angle considered, and now it was time for the final argument. Her voice was calm but confident as she spoke to the judge and jury, her words clear and powerful as she laid out the facts. But when Judge Turner made a ruling that Maya felt was unjust, she couldn't keep silent any longer. She raised her hand and objected. She didn't shout or interrupt, but her voice carried with an undeniable force. Judge Turner looked down at her, his face hardening as he heard the objection, a sharp sigh escaping his lips. He had been a judge for over 20 years, and he prided himself on maintaining order in his courtroom. No one dared to challenge his authority, but something about Maya's objection riled him. His fingers drummed on the desk as he paused for a moment, as though considering her words carefully before he spoke, his tone cold and final. He reprimanded her for disrespecting the court, and then without hesitation he imposed a fine for contempt of court. Maya stood there silent for a beat, her heart racing, but she remained composed. She had faced harsher situations in her career and knew the power of maintaining her dignity even in the face of adversity. Her client glanced nervously at her, but Maya gave him a reassuring nod, her gaze never leaving Judge Turner. She had no intention of backing down. Her calm demeanor seemed to infuriate the judge even more, though the room fell into an uneasy quiet. The fine had been imposed, and that was the end of the matter for now. But the whispers began almost immediately after the ruling, people exchanging puzzled glances, wondering if Maya had truly crossed the line, or if the judge's response had been disproportionate. Some in the room had witnessed Maya's quiet strength throughout the trial and couldn't reconcile the fine with the woman they had seen in action. Others, who didn't know her as well, assumed the worst, believing the fine was well-deserved. But there was something about the way it all unfolded that felt wrong. The judge's reaction was harsh and out of place, and as Maya stepped away from the podium, she could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her. She walked with confidence, her head held high, but inside she was already calculating her next move. This was far from over, she thought to herself, as she glanced briefly at her client. They still had work to do, and she was determined to see it through no matter what hurdles might come her way. Little did she know that this moment in the courtroom would set in motion a chain of events that would soon shake the very foundations of everything she thought she knew about justice and the people who were supposed to uphold it. The evening air was crisp as Judge Samuel Turner arrived home after a long day in court. He entered his quiet house, the usual routine of coming home to an empty kitchen and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall settling in. The sense of isolation, however, was soon interrupted by the sound of his daughter Olivia's voice from the living room. She was seated on the couch, her laptop open, papers scattered around her, working through the details of an upcoming case at the law firm where she had recently started. The hum of the city outside was a distant backdrop to their domestic silence. "Hey, Dad," Olivia greeted him without looking up, her voice warm. "How was court today?" Samuel shrugged off his coat and sat across from her, his brow furrowed as he processed the events of the day. "Same as usual. Nothing too exciting." He hesitated for a moment, the memory of Maya Grant's composed face in the courtroom lingering in his mind. "Actually, something unexpected happened today." Olivia glanced up, intrigued. "What happened?" Samuel took a breath, gathering his thoughts. "There was a lawyer today, Maya Grant. She was handling a case that I was presiding over. She challenged me in court. Not in the way you'd expect, though. She wasn't aggressive. She just raised an objection, and I found it disrespectful." Olivia's eyebrows arched in surprise. "Maya Grant? Wait, she's the attorney I'm working with at the firm." Samuel's mind paused at the mention of the name. His daughter had never mentioned the full details of her professional life, always keeping their conversations more focused on family matters. Hearing Maya's name now, especially after the fine he had just imposed, felt like an odd twist of fate. "You're working with her." Samuel's voice betrayed a hint of surprise, though he quickly masked it with a neutral tone. Olivia smiled, unaware of the ripple her words caused. "Yeah, she's amazing. Very sharp. I'm actually really learning a lot from her. She's handling the legal side of the new case I'm working on. You know, the one with the local development project. She's got this incredible mind for strategy, and she's really dedicated to justice." Samuel took a moment to process this new piece of information. The idea of his daughter, someone he had raised with such care, working alongside the same lawyer he had fined only hours before, felt deeply ironic. Olivia didn't seem to recognize the connection, but the truth was undeniable. The woman he had just humiliated in his courtroom was, in fact, the very person who was guiding his daughter's legal career. Samuel didn't respond right away, instead leaning back in his chair, staring into the distance. His mind raced through the events of the day, his thoughts swirling around Maya's composed demeanor and how it contrasted with his initial judgment of her. She had challenged him in a calm, respectful manner, not defiant or disruptive, and yet he had reacted as though she were insubordinate. Olivia noticed the shift in her father's expression. "Dad, what's wrong?" He blinked, snapping out of his reverie. "Nothing, just something about today didn't sit right with me. I think I may have been too quick to make a call." Olivia's curiosity piqued. "You mean with Maya?" Samuel nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping his lips. "I've seen a lot of lawyers come and go in my courtroom, but something about her struck me differently. She wasn't like the others." Olivia paused, considering the layers of her father's words. "She's one of the best lawyers I've worked with, Dad. I trust her judgment. You'll see." Samuel didn't respond immediately. The weight of his own decision in court hung heavily in the air, but the fact that Olivia thought so highly of Maya only deepened his internal conflict. Was he wrong? Had he misjudged Maya's actions? And if so, what did that say about his own judgment? As the night wore on, the feeling of unease only grew stronger, and for the first time in a long while, Samuel found himself questioning the fairness of his own actions. The night dragged on, and despite the usual calm of his home, Judge Samuel Turner couldn't shake the disquiet that had settled in his chest. He sat in his study, the dim light of the desk lamp casting long shadows across his legal bookshelves. His mind kept returning to Maya Grant, her calm but confident presence in the courtroom, the way she had stood her ground in the face of his rebuke. He tried to brush off the unease, telling himself it was just another long day, but he knew deep down that something had been off. He couldn't help but replay the moment in his head. The way her eyes had never wavered when he fined her for contempt. It wasn't like any other lawyer he had dealt with before. Most would have reacted with defensiveness or anger, maybe even stormed out. But Maya had simply accepted the fine, not with submission, but with a quiet dignity. Her posture never faltered, her words never faltered, and yet there was something about it all that didn't sit well with him. His actions had been swift, perhaps too swift. In that moment, he realized he hadn't even fully listened to what she had said. He had been so focused on maintaining control that he hadn't taken the time to consider her argument, her objection to the ruling, or her professionalism. But it wasn't just that moment that troubled him. Now, learning that Olivia was working alongside Maya, it felt as if the universe was conspiring to make him confront the bias he had known was lurking inside him. The stark contrast between his daughter's glowing praise of Maya and the decision he had made in court didn't sit right. He had allowed his authority as a judge to cloud his judgment, and for the first time in his career, he was uncertain if he had made a fair decision. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Samuel pulled up a chair in front of his laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated his face as he began to research Maya Grant. He didn't know why he felt compelled to dig deeper into her background, but something about the way his daughter spoke about her lawyer and the unsettling feeling in his gut pushed him to find answers. What he discovered stunned him. Maya wasn't just another lawyer. She was a force in the legal world, renowned for her work defending clients who had been systematically overlooked or mistreated. Her resume was filled with high-profile cases, each one of them showcasing her commitment to justice and fairness. She had worked on civil rights cases, environmental justice, and had even fought against wrongful convictions. It was clear from the articles he read that Maya was more than capable. She was respected, admired, and dedicated to her clients in a way that few others were. The more he read, the more his discomfort grew. The pieces fell into place. Maya wasn't just an ordinary attorney. She was an extraordinary one, someone who stood for everything Samuel claimed to uphold in his courtroom. And yet, in his desire to maintain authority, he had treated her like any other lawyer who dared to challenge him. Worse still, he had imposed a fine without fully understanding her position, something he would never do to any other attorney with a similar track record. Samuel closed his laptop slowly, leaning back in his chair. The weight of his actions bore down on him with a new intensity. Was this bias? Had he let his own prejudices color his judgment of Maya because of who she was and the way she carried herself in that moment? He was ashamed of the possibility, ashamed that he had failed to see the truth right in front of him. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He hadn't just misjudged her professionally. He had let his own assumptions cloud his ability to be impartial, the very thing he had promised to uphold as a judge. He couldn't undo what had happened in the courtroom, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let this go on any longer. The following morning, Olivia met with Maya for coffee at a small cafe downtown. The two of them often met here to discuss their ongoing cases, and it had become a quiet ritual for them amidst the whirlwind of their busy lives. Maya arrived first, her briefcase in hand, a slight smile on her face as she waved at Olivia across the room. There was always a warmth between them, a mutual respect that had grown stronger over the course of their professional relationship. Maya had taken Olivia under her wing when she had first started at the firm, and now Olivia felt privileged to work alongside someone so experienced and passionate. As Maya sat down across from her, she ordered a cappuccino before turning her attention to Olivia, who was already flipping through a case file. "How's the development case going?" Maya asked, her voice light but attentive. Olivia looked up, meeting her eyes with a smile. "Good. I'm finally starting to get the hang of things. But I've been a little distracted." She hesitated for a moment, then added, with everything that happened in court yesterday." Maya's brow furrowed slightly, and she set her cup down. "What happened?" Olivia leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "I mean, it's about you and my dad. The fine. He imposed it on you for contempt." Her words hung in the air, a little hesitant, as though she was still figuring out how to navigate the topic. Maya's face was unreadable at first, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed what Olivia had said. Then, after a moment of silence, she gave a soft chuckle, almost as if the situation wasn't worth dwelling on. "It's no big deal, Olivia," Maya replied with a calmness that contrasted with the growing tension in Olivia's chest. "The fine was just a small thing. The case is what matters, right?" Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. "But it wasn't right, was it? I mean, you're one of the most respected attorneys I know," he shoved. She paused, trying to find the right words. "Handled it differently." Maya's eyes softened, her lips curling into a faint smile. "I'm not here to change your father's mind or defend my actions. What happened, happened. I know who I am as a lawyer, but it does make me wonder what's going on in his mind." He seemed quick to react. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her thoughts swirling. She hadn't fully processed the events from the day before. When her father had mentioned Maya's name last night, she hadn't given it much thought at the time. But now, sitting here with Maya, whom she admired so deeply, she couldn't shake the suspicion that something more was going on. She had seen her father's reaction in court, his sharpness, his coldness when Maya objected to him. It hadn't seemed like him. There had been something beneath the surface, a tension in the air that had made her feel uncomfortable. "I don't get it," Olivia murmured, more to herself than to Maya. "Why would he do that? He's always been fair. But then again, he's been acting differently lately." She paused, her thoughts crystallizing. Maya, do you think it could have been personal? Maya's gaze softened, and she took a slow sip of her cappuccino before answering. I can't speak for your father, Olivia, but I do think sometimes people act out of pride or fear. Maybe he felt threatened in some way. Or maybe I'm just saying this hypothetically, he saw something in me he wasn't comfortable with. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? Maya placed the cup down gently, her expression growing more serious. Sometimes people don't realize how their biases show up. They may not even know they're doing it. Maybe he felt I was challenging his authority in a way he wasn't used to. She looked Olivia square in the eye. You have to understand, Olivia, this isn't just about law. It's about perception, power dynamics, and, sometimes, even race. I'm not saying your father is a racist, but I'm saying we all have blind spots, and those blind spots can affect our decisions. Olivia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had never thought of it that way. She had always seen her father as the model of fairness, someone who would never let personal biases cloud his judgment. But Maya's words struck a chord. Maybe there was more going on here than she had realized. I don't know what to think, Maya, Olivia said quietly. But I do know one thing. I need to talk to him. I don't know if he'll listen, but I need to try. Maya smiled, her voice soft but firm. You should. It's not just for me. It's for him too. As the conversation drifted back to the case, Olivia's mind lingered on Maya's words. The truth was beginning to take shape, but it was more complicated than she had ever imagined. The following evening, Olivia found herself in a quiet, unfamiliar place. It wasn't the weight of her workload that kept her up. It was the unsettling feeling that had been building ever since her conversation with Maya. She couldn't stop thinking about her father's actions in the courtroom and what Maya had said. The words echoed in her mind, stirring doubts she hadn't allowed herself to entertain before. Was her father's decision based on bias? Did he see Maya not just as a lawyer, but as something else entirely? Olivia had always held her father in high regard. He was a man of integrity, someone who had built a career founded on fairness and justice. But now a shadow had been cast over that image, and Olivia wasn't sure what to do with it. As the evening wore on, Olivia sat at her desk, flipping through case files, her mind only half engaged in the work before her. Every few moments, her gaze drifted toward the window, where the glow of the city lights spilled through the blinds. She knew she couldn't avoid the conversation with her father any longer. It was time to confront him, to ask the questions that had been gnawing at her for hours. Finally, she stood up, walked across the room, and picked up her phone. She dialed her father's number, her finger hovering over the call button for a moment before she pressed it. The line rang a few times before Samuel's voice answered. Olivia, everything okay? His voice was calm, and it gave her a brief sense of reassurance, but the unease in her chest remained. Yeah, Dad, everything's fine. I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Samuel's tone shifted slightly, a small hesitation before he responded. Sure, what's going on? I was thinking about something from the other day, about Maya, Olivia began, her voice measured, carefully choosing her words. I don't understand what happened in court. I mean, you fined her for contempt, but I don't know. It just didn't feel right to me. Samuel was silent for a moment, and Olivia could almost hear the gears turning in his mind. Olivia, I don't think this is something we need to revisit. The decision was made, and the court session is over. But Olivia pressed on. But Dad, I've been thinking about it. Maya's one of the best attorneys I know, and she didn't deserve to be treated like that. She was calm, respectful. You've never treated anyone else like that, so why her? What happened? Her father's voice grew firmer. I made a judgment call, Olivia. That's all there is to it. The words stung. Olivia had never heard her father sound so defensive. I don't know if you see it, but there's more to this than just a decision. Maya's a skilled lawyer, Dad. She's fought for people who don't have the resources to defend themselves. And you find her as if she were just another person trying to challenge you. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I don't think you fully considered what happened. Samuel sighed, a long, deep exhale that seemed to carry the weight of the conversation. Olivia, I'm a judge. It's my job to maintain order in the courtroom. I have to make tough decisions, even if they're not always popular. You don't understand everything that happens behind the scenes, and I don't expect you to. Olivia clenched her jaw. I do understand, Dad. I understand that Maya was trying to do her job, and I understand that you're my father, but you're also a judge. And that's why I'm asking you. What was really going on when you find her? Was it just about the court, or was it something more? Samuel's voice softened, but Olivia could hear the unease underneath. Olivia, this conversation isn't easy for me, but you have to trust that I made the right decision. The silence stretched between them, both of them feeling the weight of the unspoken. Olivia knew her father was a man of pride, someone who rarely questioned his own decisions. But this was different. She couldn't just ignore what she was feeling, what Maya had pointed out to her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just about the fine. It was about something deeper, something that her father hadn't yet come to terms with. I own up, Dad, Olivia said, her voice quiet but firm. I think you might need to look at this differently. Maybe you need to see things from a new perspective. For both of our sakes. She hung up the phone before he could respond, a heaviness settling over her. She didn't know if her father would ever admit it, but Olivia knew she couldn't back down. If he truly believed in justice, he would have to face the uncomfortable truth, and that meant confronting his own biases. As she sat back in her chair, her thoughts were muddled with questions she didn't yet have answers to. But one thing was clear. She had to continue this conversation, no matter how difficult it might become. The next few days passed in a blur for Olivia. Work at the firm had intensified, and her mind was often occupied with case files and the demands of her clients. But despite the busy schedule, the conversation with her father remained a constant undercurrent. She hadn't expected the phone call to change everything overnight, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. Samuel hadn't called her back. He hadn't tried to explain his actions, nor had he addressed her concerns. Olivia tried to convince herself that it was just his way of processing, but deep down she knew the truth. It was easier for him to avoid the confrontation altogether. On Friday afternoon, Olivia found herself at the courthouse, standing in front of her father's chambers. It had been several days since their conversation, and despite the tension, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was a conversation that needed to happen face to face. She had tried to approach him on the phone, but it hadn't worked. Now she was here, ready to address the issue head-on. Taking a deep breath, Olivia knocked on the door. She could hear a muffled come in from inside. As she entered, she was greeted by the sight of her father hunched over his desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on a legal brief. He looked up, his expression a mixture of surprise and guarded composure. "Olivia," he said, standing up and straightening his suit jacket. "What brings you here today?" "I need to talk, Dad," Olivia replied, her voice firm but calm. She stepped further into the room, the door clicking shut behind her. "We need to address what happened with Maya. It's not something I can just let go." Samuel's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I thought we were done discussing that. It was a courtroom decision, Olivia. It's over." "No, it's not over," Olivia shot back, her voice stronger now. "You find her, and then you dismissed my concerns without even considering them. Why? Was it about the case, or was it something else? Something more personal?" Her father's jaw tightened, and he crossed his arms. "I told you, Maya Grant was disrespectful. She crossed the line. I had to maintain order in my courtroom." Olivia shook her head, frustration bubbling up inside her. "No, Dad. It wasn't about order. Maya wasn't disrespectful. She made a valid point, and you didn't listen. And now you're hiding behind your position instead of acknowledging that maybe you were wrong." Samuel's face darkened. "Olivia, don't push me on this." "I'm not pushing you. I'm trying to understand," Olivia said, her voice softening, but still unwavering. "What happened in that courtroom doesn't sit right with me, and I need you to be honest with me. Was it just about Maya's objection, or did it have something to do with who she is, or what she represents?" For a long moment, Samuel didn't answer. His eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he remained silent, staring at his daughter with an intensity that was difficult to read. Olivia stood her ground, her heart racing as she waited for his response. She could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them, the tension that had been building ever since that fateful day in the courtroom. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice lower than before. "I'm not proud of how I handled it, Olivia. But sometimes I'm afraid of how things are changing. I've been a judge for over 20 years, and in that time, I've seen a lot. But I've never had someone challenge me in the way Maya did. It threw me off, and I reacted defensively. Maybe I was too harsh. I don't know. But I can't undo it." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She had expected her father to be defensive. But this was different. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. It was the first time she had heard him admit that maybe he had made a mistake. "I understand, Dad," Olivia said quietly. "I really do. But that's why we need to talk about it. Because the person you were in that courtroom wasn't the person I know. And you need to reconcile that." Samuel exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his daughter's words seemed to settle in. "I don't know how to fix it, Olivia. I'm not sure I can." "You don't have to fix everything," Olivia replied, her voice soft but firm. "But you do need to face it. If you really want to do what's right, you need to be willing to see things from another perspective. Maya deserves an apology, and so do you. This isn't just about legal rulings. It's about fairness, and it's about honesty." The silence that followed was heavy. Samuel stared at his daughter, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. He had always prided himself on his ability to make decisions without hesitation, but now, for the first time, he was unsure of himself. He had to come to terms with the possibility that his actions might have been shaped by something deeper, something he had avoided confronting. I'll think about what you said," Samuel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't promise anything right now, but I'll think about it." Olivia nodded slowly, a sense of quiet determination settling within her. She didn't expect her father to change overnight, but this was a start. They had begun the difficult conversation, and it was a step forward. For both of them, the days after their confrontation were filled with a kind of tense stillness. Olivia had hoped that her father would come to terms with his actions, but there had been no word from him. The courtroom incident seemed to hang in the air like an unresolved chord, one that refused to be silenced. Olivia focused on her work, but even in her professional success, a part of her remained unsettled. She had pushed her father to confront something deep within himself, but the silence that followed made her question if she had gone too far. Then, one afternoon, Olivia received a call that took her by surprise. It was from her father. His voice, though familiar, sounded different this time, softer, more reflective. "Olivia, can you meet me at the courthouse today? There's something I need to talk about," he said, his tone carrying a quiet urgency. The request was unexpected, and for a moment, Olivia's heart skipped. She had been wondering if her father would ever truly acknowledge what had happened, or if he would simply bury it. But this call felt different. It wasn't about a case or a ruling, it was about something more personal. "I'll be there in an hour," Olivia said, already grabbing her coat and heading out the door. When she arrived at the courthouse, she found her father waiting for her in the same office where they had had their last conversation. He stood by the window, looking out at the city, his face tense, as though the weight of the decision he had made was finally catching up with him. Olivia stepped into the room, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with anticipation, the silence more powerful than words. She could feel the unease radiating from him, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure how this moment would unfold. Finally, Samuel turned to face her. "Olivia, I've been thinking about everything you said, and I owe you an apology." Olivia blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Dad, you don't have to." "No, I do," Samuel interrupted, his voice firm. "I've spent days trying to justify my actions, trying to find a reason that would make it right. But there isn't one. The truth is, I wasn't fair to Maya. I wasn't fair to you either. I let my position as a judge cloud my judgment, and I let my pride get in the way of doing what was right." Olivia stood still, her breath catching in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment her father would finally admit that his actions had been wrong. And yet hearing him say it out loud made everything feel more real, more raw than she had expected. I think. I think I was afraid, Samuel continued, his eyes not meeting hers as he spoke. Afraid that I was losing control, afraid that I wasn't as relevant as I once was. I've been a judge for so long, and the power I hold in that courtroom, it means something to me. But when Maya challenged me, it shook me. She wasn't intimidated, not by me or by the system, and I didn't know how to react to that. Olivia felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She had always known her father to be a man of conviction, but she hadn't realized how vulnerable he was, how much he feared losing the authority he had spent his life building. Dad, I don't think it's about losing control, Olivia said softly, taking a step closer to him. It's about being willing to listen, to admit when we're wrong. Maya challenged you, yes, but she did it because she believed in what she was fighting for. You don't have to be afraid of that. You can still be a powerful figure in the courtroom, but you also have to remember that power isn't just about ruling with an iron fist. It's about fairness, about hearing all sides. Samuel's eyes met hers then, a flicker of recognition in his gaze. I know now. And I regret how I acted. I regret letting my fear take over. Olivia felt a weight lift from her chest as the tension between them began to ease. For the first time in a long time, she could see the man who had been both her father and her role model, not just as a judge, but as someone who was learning, evolving, and willing to admit his flaws. I'm glad you're saying this, Dad, Olivia said, her voice gentle. But now you need to make things right with Maya. She deserves that from you. Samuel nodded, the resolve in his expression returning. I will. I'm going to call her. I'll apologize and make sure she knows that what happened in that courtroom was wrong. Olivia smiled, relief flooding through her. That's all I've wanted to hear. As she stood in that moment with her father, she realized that this conversation had been just as much about him as it had been about her. It wasn't easy to confront one's own biases, to admit that pride had clouded judgment. But Samuel had taken that first step, and that was something Olivia had never thought she'd see. For the first time in a long while, father and daughter stood together in understanding, not just as a judge and his daughter, but as two people navigating a complex world, trying to make it right. The following week was marked by a strange quiet in the Turner household. Samuel had taken a few days to reflect on his daughter's words, retreating into his work and leaving Olivia to wrestle with the aftermath of their difficult conversation. Though the air was thick with unresolved tension, Olivia couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. Her father had admitted, even if briefly, that something had gone wrong. That was a start. Meanwhile, Maya had continued her work with Olivia. Both of them focused on their cases, but Maya couldn't escape the knowledge that Olivia was wrestling with something deeper than just her workload. She noticed the subtle changes in Olivia's demeanor, how she sometimes looked distant, her brow furrowed in thought as if something was weighing heavily on her. Maya knew her well enough by now to understand that Olivia wasn't the type to let things go easily. It was a Friday afternoon when Olivia received a call that took her by surprise. She had just finished reviewing a case file and was about to leave the office for the day when her phone rang. It was her father. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. Dad, she said, trying to keep the surprise out of her voice. Is everything okay? Olivia. Samuel's voice came through, calm but serious. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and about the way I handled things with Maya. Olivia's heart quickened, but she remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the way you've made me see things from a different perspective, Samuel said slowly. I won't pretend that I've figured it all out, but I realize now that I made a mistake, and I need to make it right. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She had expected an apology, perhaps, but not such an open admission of wrong. Her father, the man who had always prided himself on being unwavering in his decisions, was acknowledging his flaws. Dad, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he replied. But I owe Maya an apology, and I owe you one too. Olivia felt a weight lift off her shoulders, but it was mixed with a new, deeper understanding. She had never truly understood the burden of wearing her father's robes until now, until she saw him grappling with his own sense of failure. It wasn't just about the courtroom or the case. It was about recognizing the biases we all carry, whether conscious or not, and confronting them. "Thank you, Dad," Olivia said, her voice steady. "That means more to me than you know. I'm going to reach out to Maya," Samuel said, "and I'll take full responsibility for my actions. I don't know how she'll react, but I have to do this." "Take it one step at a time," Olivia encouraged, her tone warm yet firm. "You've done the hard part already by recognizing it. The rest will follow." Later that afternoon, Olivia met Maya at a cafe, where they discussed the week's cases as they always did. As they sipped their coffee, Olivia couldn't hold it in any longer. "Maya," she began, her eyes focused on her, "my dad called me today. He's thought a lot about what happened, and he wants to apologize. He realizes that he wasn't fair to you in court." Maya blinked in surprise, her gaze softening as she set her cup down. "He called you?" Olivia nodded. "He admitted that he let his own biases get in the way. He's going to reach out to you personally." Maya took a deep breath, her expression unreadable for a moment before she exhaled slowly. "I never expected an apology, honestly, but I'm glad he's thinking about it. It's a good first step." Olivia smiled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "I think it's more than a first step. It's the beginning of something important. My dad's always been a man of principle, but it took a lot for him to admit he was wrong. It's not easy, and I know it won't be an overnight change, but I think this is where things can really start to shift." Maya leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a small smile. "Sometimes the hardest thing is recognizing our own flaws. It's a brave thing to do. For him, for you, and for everyone involved." As the conversation moved to lighter topics, Olivia couldn't help but feel that things had changed, even if only slightly. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be long, and the scars of old assumptions and biases wouldn't disappear overnight. But the seeds of change had been planted, both in her father's heart and in their relationship. Later that evening, Olivia's phone buzzed with a message. It was from her father. It simply read, "I called Maya. I'm taking responsibility for what happened. I hope she will accept it." Olivia smiled to herself, knowing that the conversation was just the beginning of a much deeper transformation, not just for her father, but for everyone involved. And for the first time in a long while, Olivia felt confident that the future was, at least in part, in her hands.